Welcome to Pablo Investigates. In today's episode, I'm talking to great bassist and composer Scott Colley. We not only talk about his longtime relationship with Jim Hall, with Chris Potter, Andrew Hill and Herbie Hancock, we also talk about the very special time when he subbed in the great Wayne Shorter quartet. We talk about his relationships to drummers Brian Blade and Bill Stewart. And we also listened to a song from Empire, one of my favorite recordings of him. And he talks about the music while we listen to the music. So he had some insight into that. And it was really, really inspiring to talk to him. He's always amazing, I think, on the bass. As a musician in general, I'm always amazed by his ability to have his ego in check while really adding to the music big time. Also, we talk about studying with Charlie Haden and much more, you'll see. If you like this podcast, please subscribe to this channel, leave a comment if you like. And if you would like to support this podcast, you can become a patron at patreon.com/PabloHeld. It really helps me to develop this series and put out more interviews in the future. So thank you. And if you are like me, I always take notes when I talk to people or when I listen to an interview myself. And I don't want to forget the things that I find inspiring, so I need a notebook. So I put out one myself. This is called Investigation Notes. You can find this on my Bandcamp page, and it has music paper, staff paper, and you can write down all the things that you don't want to forget in it. So get that on my Bandcamp page, and yeah, happy investigating. Take care. When I listen to you, I always have the feeling that you are very, very good at keeping your ego in check. And I don't mean that in a way where you're holding something back or anything, because you seem like you're ready to jump into whatever is happening or make something happen in the moment, right there. And there's moments where you leave a lot of space or even don't play in very, very active situations. So I was wondering about that, how you worked on keeping your ego in check so you the ego doesn't interfere as much or doesn't have such power over you that it stifles you into showing off or something, you know?
Well, thanks for the kind words. I mean, one of the things that I've thought about over many, many years of making music, and I've learned from my mentors, that whenever I'm approaching a particular situation in music, to always ask myself, what's the best, what's the most powerful thing I can do in this moment and I don't mean power in terms of volume or anything else, or speed or power in the way that a lot of people think about power, but the most effective, powerful way to approach a particular moment. And many times, if you ask yourself that question, and you're constantly, it's like a mantra for me in a way, that I'm always asking myself that question. And in moments of music, it could be the answer is a burst of fast notes. It could be something loud or disruptive or all kinds of things. But it could also mean stop playing. And very often, the answer is put something very simple or nothing in the space, and that's going to help. So the objective for me, or the goal, is to really just listen to every moment and listen to what's going on in the entire group, and try and anticipate the intention of the entire group, and not just what my particular will is for that moment. Yeah. And trying to look at the whole picture as much as possible. I practice this in terms of when I'm listening music, and when I'm playing with others, is the exercise or the process of really spreading my attention throughout the entire group and all of what's going on. And that's always a challenge as musicians. We practice focusing on really detailed things and trying to hone our playing and our understanding of music and our vocabulary and our facility on the instrument and ability to get around. But really, all of that should be abandoned, in my mind, especially in all music, but especially improvised music, music where you're creating, spontaneous composition, where you're creating the content as well as the execution of the ideas and the, every aspect of it.
Right.
So you want to kind of like put yourself within the group, equal member, not more, not less. And this is, I think about this a lot when I'm writing music, and even in terms of when it's my own group.
Yeah.
When I've decided the set list, or I've written the music or something like that, I still want to eventually, I may tell everybody, well, this is sort of what it's about, and here's the music and the written music, give them as much information as I can about what my preconceptions were for that piece. But once I then begin the process of the rehearsal, performance, recording, whatever it is to step back and put myself in the center of all that's going on.
Yeah.
And trying to respond in that way. And it's also very critical, how you interact with other people in trying to describe what you want, because it's very easy, it's important to kind of develop a rapport and understand who you're speaking to and what they have to offer, what their strengths and in the music are, and how you can make them feel open. Some people you can say certain things to. I guess I'm going off on a tangent, but you can
Perfect.
say certain things to somebody and they go and they shut down, and then all these possibilities are, other people, they have no, you can say whatever you want, and it's just it's a part of developing relationships in the music.
It's an art form in itself, talking to musicians
absolutely.
about the music. Who were people where you were fascinated by the way they would talk to their band members, and also to you maybe?
Well, I have many mentors in that area, people that I think about often, that I was really fortunate to be in their band and see how they respond. And that's one of the best, it's one of the most amazing learning experiences, just to see the really subtleties, the way people work with other musicians. And I think a lot about Andrew Hill.
Yeah.
When I first met Andrew, we were forming a sextet, or he was, he had written a bunch of new music and just kind of returned from kind of a hiatus for several years and moved back to New York and wanted to start this sextet. And I was, so excited to be a part of that group. And I remember the first rehearsal, and he had written some chord changes, and then he had written a bass line. And I think I had asked him, do you like it when I play the chord changes behind the soloist, or when I just play the bass line? And Andrew was very poetic in his music, but also in the way that he would speak to others. He was really an incredible, warm and generous person. But he just said, I don't play the bass. You play the bass. And then he laughed, and that was the only thing he ever said to me. And then we ended up playing with the sextet and trio, and I made a duo. I think I made a duo recording with him, and some stuff with other horn projects, a big band. I ended up over the course of the next 5 or 6 years, playing with him all the time, um, and he would just want to he just wanted to see how I would respond, and he didn't want to assert his will on my approach to it. And he was very patient in letting me find my way in his music, which was, music that his language. I had listened to this music a ton over the years, but when you're in the middle of it and how to respond to the way he approached playing in the rhythm section, or even just really specific things, was so unique. And I found myself over the course of years constantly having a question, but not really answering it after that point. Well, actually, we had a lot of great conversations, but I guess he's one. Herbie is another great example of like not telling you what to do or what he wants you to do. At least in the projects that I did, which were mostly very, open and a lot of free playing, or free, maybe very loose.
I know what you mean. I mean, you played in the kind of a couple of the last projects of Herbie, which were more like playing, open situations. Of course, there was some orchestra stuff and others,
right.
But I think it was mostly quartet, either with Gary Thomas or Bobby Hutcherson, right? And some trio work maybe.
Terry Lynn Carrington.
Yeah.
And we did some things with orchestra with the Chicago Symphony, which was amazing. But that to me was a very different. Like then he would say, open it up. But I kind of saw it as my role is stepping back to what we were talking about before. It was like, hold this down and give these other 90 people something to connect to rhythmically. But in the smaller group things, it was very much like sometimes going out and playing for a half hour, 45 minutes before we'd ever approach any material. And we had a lot of songs that we could go to, but those were always kind of like later after we've explored some other textures. So
my assumption is that Herbie during that time was really, really impressed and influenced by the new Wayne Shorter quartet. And I think most of his projects were leaning into that during that time. If it wasn't promoting a record or something, were leaning into that direction.
Yeah. Yeah, and even at that time, I remember trying to like see if I could narrow, or kind of be the go, just to kind of push him in the direction of maybe writing some material down.
Oh,
but it never, that's a whole interview in itself, just how he approaches harmony and spontaneous composition.
And, we need to talk about this, Scott. We need to talk about it.
I mean, there was a lot of times where I would like, what is that? Play that again. And he'd play it again and it would be different. I do remember sitting there with score paper and trying to you see these voicings coming by and you go, okay, that would make let's make that into something that we could work in as a group. And then by the time you circle around to it again, he plays it again and it's different.
Yeah.
And it was very difficult to get his mind to stop long enough to go,
to stop creating.
That was this.
Yeah.
Well, you just say, I remember having a discussion with him and asking him about a sus chord, how do you approach something? And he'd play it, and I have to say Andrew was very much this way as well, like writing something to give you, in a way, on the stepping back. But with Andrew, I always said, don't write me chord changes anymore, because his chord changes, it would maybe give me an idea of what he wanted in the bass, as the root of that chord, but it really didn't give me an idea of what's really in the music. So what I really wanted was the score, so that I could just see what, because it was so linear, these different lines working, and as the lines converged in any particular moment, it's these lines going in different directions, and then whatever texture they make at that moment, that's what I want to know.
Yeah.
I don't want to know what because Andrew was funny. I mean, he writes something that say, B flat 7, and it would have every note in the score would be,
but the ones from
not in a not in a B flat 7. You'd be like, okay, that's not helpful.
Yeah.
And I think in a lot of ways, going back to Herbie, that's very similar in that. Obviously, the results and the way that they dealt with music and were very different, but in that way, very similar. It's like they learned to go so far beyond the box of traditional harmony, or the way that we think about jazz harmony, or the way jazz harmony is taught. That wasn't even an element to consider anymore.
But did you get some more straight answers out of Herbie, considering his harmonic concept of maybe exchanging chords or functions, or?
Not really. I mean, in some levels, just in terms of, talk a great deal always about tension and creating tension for long periods, and deciding when, and when the release, or the when to finally, we would do this in terms of harmony, and it was also in terms of rhythm. Yeah. Specifically playing in different time signatures simultaneously.
Yeah.
Or not having, and Terry Lynn and Herbie and I talked quite a bit about this, as I recall, about, creating tension for long periods of time by playing, like I would play in one specific key and he would play in another key, and Gary Thomas or Bobby might, play in a different key. And then we're also experimenting with different, it could be polyrhythms related, or it could be actually totally different, fundamental quarter notes, for example, right. that would happen for a long period of time. And then when you'd find, it was like kind of a game to see who was going to resolve first, who was going to first decide to give it up and to join the others,
right.
Or to align, and then within a trio or a quartet, aligning with one person and in a way ignoring the other. Yeah. Again, back to spreading your tension around, just how that would work, and the kind of tension that you can create. And then how long do you really want that tension to build before you finally resolve it? And when you finally play something that's in the same key, then
it locks in a different way.
Like the sky would open, and it would just be, then you just want to play the simplest groove for the longest time, and just over C7 or whatever it was, like, and then that would be the resolution. So so I guess the answer to your question is not so much in specific terms about harmony, but definitely in terms of tension and resolution of ideas and textures.
When you guys were on tour, did you listen to the recordings from the gig?
Yeah.
Herbie also?
He was always, he liked to listen in the bus after the gigs.
Right after the gigs, he would listen to it.
Yeah.
Cool.
I wasn't always so in, a lot of times I just go to my bunk and go do my thing. go to sleep or whatever. But yeah.
Would you be
And then
surprised what he was listening for or what he was pointing out? Because everybody listens to music differently and everybody maybe pays attention differently.
Yeah, I don't remember specifically big differences in the things we were hearing, but you know, we would talk about things, and then sometimes another interesting thing about that band too was that we would play some long sound checks that would go on and on, as I recall, especially with the trio, and with Gary as well, as we'd play these long sound checks and then just stop playing when they'd open the house to let the people in, and I'd go and eat some food or something. Herbie would chant, and then so like a half hour, 45 minutes, we had been experimenting on all this, working on sound, you know, making sure we did the sound check, but also just playing. And I really found this to be a great process for growth in open improvisation. You just play a bunch, and then you'd leave the stage and then you'd come back out on stage, and that feeling that you left off with, or even some of the ideas that you had left off with, you just start doing it with another couple thousand people in the room. You know,
it becomes more casual.
You know, it was so, in that regard, I really love the process of how that band, you know, and generally, as I recall, we would do, you know, long concerts and play over some really very loose forms. There was one particular arrangement of Dolphin Dance that he had that evolved over time, but it was basically like one chorus of Dolphin Dance could take 10 minutes or it could take an hour and a half. And it was just kind of different cues of different sections, but you don't know what the next section is going to be, but someone would cue out of a thing, and sometimes they were short, sometimes they were long. And then later on we would maybe get into some actual songs, you know, like playing you know, some of Herbie's tunes or Terry Lynn's or standards or whatever we were playing at the time.
Wow. I mean, I think you were also in the first band where he reintroduced actual proof to the repertoire. I think in the quartet with Bobby, that's the first time he brought it back after such a long time. And I'm curious how you learned that song.
Well, like all of those songs, I listened to them since I was, you know, 12 or 13, 14 years old, maybe, hearing that music for the first time. So the parts of the song, you know, that I kind of knew what to do in regards, or what had been done, and with a lot of the music, you know, playing with someone like Herbie or musicians that you've been listening to for that long, it's like I'll go and reference the original songs if I need to figure out specifics on form, you know, lines or harmony, or just making sure that I understand where it's coming from, you know, or what parts of the music there are. And then at that point, I really just put it completely away, because it's there's a lot of weight. If you're not careful, there's a lot of weight of the history of a song like that can come on to you and keep you from really exploring it on your own terms in this modern moment, or this particular moment in time, and the knowledge that, you know, in other words, you know, musicians like, well, there's no musicians like Herbie, but you know, all the favorite band leaders that I've worked with were always like, you figure out how, like what we said about Andrew, is like,
Yeah.
you figure out, we want to see what you do with this, not what, you know, Paul Jackson did, or not what Ron Carter did, or
right.
blah, blah, blah. It's, you know, those influences are huge in my mind. But really at that point that you're in that moment making this music, again, it's very important to kind of, for me to just try and shed that as much as possible and to deal with it on your own terms. So that, because that's the only reason to revisit a song like that after all these years. If you're just going to try and replicate, you're never going to do it as well. Absolutely. In the same way that they did it. So if there's any reason to rehash a song like that, shouldn't use that term, to revisit a song like that would be to really to try something completely new. Right. And, you know, so once you understand the nuts and bolts of the song, you just try and like then shed all that and you know, approach it in a way. And again, those musicians that I mentioned, band leaders, that would encourage you to do that, and have the patience to wait for you to figure out what direction that might be, and then that can challenge them to approach these songs in a very different way as well. So,
and how curious is Herbie in terms of his sideman to, I mean, how curious is he towards you? You know, did he ask you a lot of questions about your approach to the music, your approach to certain pieces, or your approach to playing in general?
Well, he's an incredibly inquisitive, curious person, in general, anyway. About music, about people, about other forms of art, and so you know, one thing I really remember is that he could get involved in something, and time would just disappear. Time as like, you know, clock time, would just disappear, and you know, he was. Which I found to be really amazing. Like if he really focused on something, and it could be a very simple progression or a thing, and it would just be like he just, you know, and there could be a lot of stuff going on in a sound check and people moving around and moving equipment and stuff going on. It'd be like, and he has an amazing focus in that way. And to me, that's so inspiring, is that you can just like really get into something and then everything else disappears completely. To the point where he was late, you know, all the time. And my daughter, who was I don't know, like 3 or 4, and she came out on tour with us, and we were waiting to go somewhere, and I think we were doing a short bus ride, so my family was with me, and he got on the bus, and she said, "Herbie, you're a slowpoke." She was sitting in the driver's seat of this tour bus, and he looked at me like he was pissed, like, "You told her to say that." I said, I didn't tell her to say that. You know, anyway. He would get involved in something, you know, but seriously, in a musical situation, and just everything else would disappear. And now I'm thinking of it, I can't remember what your original question was.
It's fine.
So I don't know if I answered it.
I was asking about, did he ask you a lot of questions?
Yeah, I guess that was the point I was trying to get at, is that he was very curious. You know, about everybody's, you know, and again, not just about music, but your personal life, and what was going on and how you're feeling. And, you know, it's very, very concerned and genuine, you know.
And
that regard.
another question regarding Herbie and Andrew. I was always I was always asking myself what their relationship was, or did they have a relationship, or how did they view each other? Was Herbie checking out a lot of stuff that Andrew is doing? I know they played on the same Hank Mobley record, I think, but that's about it. I think in terms of where we could see them together, they've used a couple of similar people, obviously, but and they came up in a similar time. But I never read somewhere where Herbie said something about him or vice versa.
Yeah, I'd never had that conversation with either of them, as I recall. But it's interesting. I mean, they're both from the south side of Chicago. And of similar age. And I guess Andrew's was a little older. But I definitely hear connections in the way that they think about music, but I never had that conversation, no. But it's interesting that they're, although Andrew had that record where they and a lot of people said that he was born in Haiti, because it was on the liner notes of one of his Blue Note records. I'm not sure.
Could be,
that he was, but ends up that was just not true. But then when people would ask Andrew about it, he wouldn't deny it, and he was very good at being very vague and just kind of floating off in a conversation in another direction. So, but he was born in Chicago, and a lot of people in my life were born in Chicago. My wife was born on the South Side as well, but I never had the conversation with either one of them.
Okay. When I was listening to I think your latest recording, there's a song. It's called Bridge of Dawn. And I was curious because I had to think of Andrew regarding that song. And I'm just curious, is there anything that reminds you of Andrew in that song, or is that just something that I made up? Maybe I listened to it a couple of times, and it really, there was moments where I could hear him playing that song also, and
thank you.
I don't know. It's a beautiful song.
That means a lot. I appreciate it. No, nothing specific. It's just when I wrote it, I thought about him, and I thought about just simple melodies, and it's a simple song in a lot of ways, and just somehow the feel of it and the way it should move, and that was it. I mean, again, almost like what we were talking about before about approaching other people's music that has a lot of weight or history. It was like I didn't want to specifically. I didn't take specific elements consciously of the things that that he did as a composer, but I just sat down and thought of him,
Okay, yeah.
And I might have written that partially on the piano and partially on the bass as well. So, which is something I often do.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And is it something that you always did, or that where the piano kind of came later or into the compositional process?
Well, I'm not a good piano player at all, but the kinds of I work on the piano to understand harmony and to have the visual aspect of voicings and see how things work and all of that. But because I'm so much freer to express and to create new melodies and new ideas on the bass, that I like to a lot of times approach from that, from that angle on the bass. And then when I need to figure out the harmony that I'm thinking about, and I need to clarify it or to make sure that I'm able to write down something that will allow the other musician who I'm trying to present this music to give them the information in the clearest way possible. Then I'll move to the piano. But my tendency is, because my piano playing is so limited, it becomes very vertical. And when I'm playing the bass and a lot of the music that I like to play is a lot of times, again, based on more linear things and how they converge at that moment. Now, a great pianist such as yourself is somebody like, you've transcended all that stuff, and you can move linear or horizontally, vertically, any way that you want through the instrument. For me, it's limited. So I tend to move around, and it's also composing away from anything, any instrument. It's just thinking of ideas and then imagining them. And then maybe I'll move to the bass, and then maybe I'll start. I use Sibelius generally as a tool, to notation tool. So then I'll start maybe inputting things, and then I'll move, and I'm like, well, what's that I'm thinking here? And then I'll move to the piano. So I'm like kind of in this room where I am just like moving in a circle. Yeah. And also that's really helpful for me when I get stuck compositionally in a moment. It's generally because I'm stuck looking at it from this angle, either on the bass or at the piano or away from the instruments. And if I change instruments or leave the instrument, I see where I'm stuck. Yeah. And then very often move right past it immediately. And sometimes that's just like, I like to run. So I go like, I'll write some, and then I'll get stuck, and then I'll just run, and then I'll come back, or I'll just take a walk, or I'll walk the dog or whatever. And then I come back, and then there's a solution. Yeah. It's when I sit there from the same angle, doing the same thing over and over and over again, expecting a different result, whatever that quote is. It's like, okay, well, let me just look at it from, it's as if I really think of it as like, as an object, and you look at it and you turn it, and then you go, oh, it's totally different from that angle, and let me see and if I'm approaching it from, or even just writing from the bass, where I feel very, fluid or comfortable. It's like I'm seeing something from a melodic standpoint, and then I go from a bass perspective, or double stops or chordal ideas or something. Then I'm looking at it from different angles, even on the instrument itself. So that's a lot of times what I do in the process of writing. Very helpful.
Yeah. I mean, it is something that goes through all of your projects, I think, or most of them that I know. But my favorite record of yours is Empire. And that's a record where I feel, and as I said, I feel this in other projects as well, but there I'm so struck with, it seems like you're writing for the players. I mean, especially Frizzell in that project, I felt it was the perfect, I mean, you could put him anywhere and he'll be the perfect choice, but him playing for Sophia, or the tune in 7, the second one, it just feels like there could be nobody else who should play this in that moment with that combination. And I was wondering about that, how you write for certain people and how you envision a certain, how things work together.
Well, for me, I really don't write music just to write music. I'm always thinking of a particular individual. Occasionally I've written let me just write a song, but very rarely. Like it's so that's that recording was a good example of that, is that I thought of the people that I'd like to put together in a room to see what would happen, obviously. And my favorite musicians of all time are in that band, and a few people. I'm not sure if Ralph Alessi had played with Bill, for example, before that recording. I'm not sure, but obviously I know Brian and Bill had played together. But anyway, the decision of how to put that together was definitely who's gonna be involved, and then writing the music, then just picturing how they might respond to this idea, and what there's a lot of strengths in that band, but a lot of really different textures to be used. And then what if I put this combination, and with what if Craig Taborn plays and it's this texture, or whether it should be piano, maybe those kind of things I would think about. And to me, that makes the writing really a lot easier, because I can just imagine it. Then the challenge comes again, is abandoning your preconceptions about how they're gonna digest this material and how they're going to play over it. And deciding if there is something to be said to focus the song itself, if it seems like it's going off into the weeds. But most, with a band like that, it's basically like I just want to go, okay, here's a tempo, let's start here, and then just again stepping back into my role or my feeling that I'm an equal member of this, and I'm not going to force it in any direction. So and when I abandon those preconceptions, what I end up with almost always is something much better than I imagined.
And you become more of a sideman inside of your own project.
Totally. Yeah. And so with all the music that all the bands that I put together now, that's really how I try and approach it, because I want to play with people that, there's already the reason why I asked them to play with me, and why why I'm drawn to their playing. So I want to be a part of that, and not just put a band together and try and assert my will over that band. That's very much how I consider all the things that and that's why I do a lot of collaborations in that regard too, where everybody's writing, everybody's contributing equally to putting the project together. So one thing I remember about Empire is there's that song called Tomorrowland that I play as a duo with Bill. And it's just these two lines that kind of move around, and then we play open for a while, and then it might be a couple chords written in there, but mostly it's just two lines. And I put it in front of him, and it's rubato, so there's no indicated feeling tempo. I didn't write anything in there. It's just and we started playing it, and I had imagined it moving really kind of quickly, No, that's the wrong song. Shit. How does Tomorrowland go? Anyway,
we can put it on.
This line,
Let's put it on.
Okay.
I don't know how well it will sound over my ear pods, but let's put it on quickly, because also I can I know it for a long time, but I can't differentiate the titles so much. Let's go. How does it sound?
It's coming across.
Okay. Yeah, it's beautiful.
So this is just like the introduction part. And when he started playing the melody and we were rehearsing it, right from here. No.
Right.
I imagined this moving when I wrote it 3 times as fast.
Yeah.
At least, you know what I mean? And so that was the thing. It's like, so we were playing in a rehearsal, just me and him sitting there playing this thing, and we played it, you know, a few times through just to see how it would move. And I just had to, I just decided, okay, I'm going to surrender to it, and we'll record it this way and see. We can always do it faster if, you know, it wouldn't be a problem for me to say, you know, could we move this faster?
Yeah.
But then what came of it to me was, you know, was much more interesting. I remember it did change where I ended up putting it. I had written the whole recording in a particular arc with a particular sequence in mind. So beginning to end, how is this going to go for, you know, an hour or whatever, however long the, you know, it was going to last. And then I had a certain sequence in mind and how one song would move into the next song and all of that. And I do remember that when we ended up playing this and the recording, this had such a slower feel. It changes where it went in the sequence of songs. I do remember that.
Yeah.
But to me, the thing of just writing the music down is just the very beginning of the process of composition in my mind. In that, you know, once I begin then to play it with others, I'm going to want to change how it maybe change things around, but then also it's just the beginning of the life of that song. I tend to rewrite stuff a lot as I see how other people approach it. You know?
Have you gone back to pieces from that record?
Yeah, I have. And we toured, not with the full group, but with Ralph and Craig Taborn and Brian after that, I think. So, yeah.
Nice. Sounds really nice.
Oh, thanks.
Also, the sound of the record is incredible. I really like it.
Yeah, that was James Farber and Chris Allen.
Yeah.
And we did that record, and then I think we recorded for 2 days at Sear Sound, and then actually edited the recording. That was an interesting process, actually. That was really, it was intense, but it was really fun to do. Is that the 2 days after we recorded, we just set up with James Farber doing, you know, in the booth at Sear, and then Chris would be in another room doing the edits, and then as we'd edit each song, we'd move them over to so that James was just dealing with sonic aspect of the recording, and Chris was just dealing with the editing portion of it.
Right.
So we put the songs together, and then so I would just move from room to room back and forth, and we did that for 2 15-hour days or whatever. It's like, wow. But just like usually a lot of times when after I record, I'll have a lot of time to sit but I just for this, I remember deciding that I just want to try and do it.
So you decided
while it's all fresh.
So you decided on the takes during the recording?
Not completely. You know, there may be some different takes. So I would do some listening in the lounge and then go with edit concepts to Chris.
Yeah.
And then he would see if they would work and how they would work. And then once all of that was done, we'd move in with James, and he would mix. And so it was really quick, actually. It was an interesting process, because normally, like I'm working on a project now with Edward Simon and Brian Blade, second record of this in Steelhouse, and that's like, you know, we're all doing it remotely from different parts of the country with an engineer in San Francisco, and you know, it's like going back and forth, and it's a lot more, you know, it moves slow.
So hang on, everybody's recording their own parts at their place?
No, we recorded the record.
Oh, okay.
In Sonoma in California after a tour.
Okay.
So we recorded in November before this shit hit the fan, and we couldn't travel. So we're just mixing and editing the record now. But it's such a different, I'm just saying, it's just such a different process than actually just going in and trying to
do it right away.
Yeah. But that was the process. And to me, the process that you choose in every aspect of the music and every aspect of writing or creating a recording, the process really affects the result always, you know. And that's true on your instrument. It's true within a rhythm section. It's true within a whole band, like how you decide how to I don't know, maybe you're getting a little vague, but just how to go about making the music happen, how much written music you're going to put on a page, how much you really want to tell people what to do, or how much do you want to leave out, intentionally taking away pieces so that they'll feel more open, you know, deciding whether the improvisation is going to go over just a bass line, or you put chords involved, or a melody, or, you know, how is the meter, you know, how do you, to me, that's a really interesting thing. And then to see, like, a lot of times certain combinations of people, I want to give them much less information than I would give in other situations, just to see what would happen.
Yeah. Let's maybe take an example of two drummers that you have worked with a lot in your own projects, but also in other bands. Let's take Bill Stewart and Brian Blade.
Let's take them.
Yes.
let's put them in a room together. Yeah. Well, man, I saw part of your interview with Bill, and it was great, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
And yeah, I was thinking in that regard, like, we're talking about how much to put in front of somebody, is like, I did a couple of trio records in around, you know, it was like 20 years ago.
Magic Line
with Chris and Bill, and it was so great to just, I mean, you could just write very little, and just, you know, to try and, you know, to create something that's just kind of a launching pad for what you want to have, what, you know, you're just kind of creating a direction and then saying, okay, here we go. And that's, and the examples of people that you know, composers that I think about when I write that way, you know, or attempt to write that way, be like, you know, Ornette or Paul Motion, you know, the masters of, like, the 8-bar, 10-bar thing that just kind of goes, okay, and here we go, and this is the direction we're going to go in. So that's kind of how I think about, you know, writing for that. And definitely I don't write at the piano, because that just kind of slows me down. It's just like, you know, for me. But specifically, you were talking about Brian and Bill are two of my I mean, it's just like where every quarter note, if you decide that just like, okay, we're just going to play quarter notes all night, and I'm like, that's the shit, I'll just do that.
Yeah.
That's what it's like, this feels great. So if you start from that point, which both those drummers do, or, like, just hearing them just like that on a ride cymbal, and then you go, that's always the best place to start from. If everything feels great, it doesn't matter what how complex or how simple something is. But definitely playing with the, I guess it's a broken record in a way, but it's kind of surrendering to that feel and going, okay, the things that I would play with Bill is different than the things that I would play with Brian.
Yeah.
The attack, where I would place the note in the groove.
Can you go into detail?
Not really. I mean, I can't. In a way, I can, but trying to describe that stuff with words is almost like, it's.
Yeah, I mean, you've played with them so for such a long time. It's subconscious to the highest level, I'm sure, But I'm sure at the beginning where you maybe played with them, where you started to get to know them, was there a thought process going on?
But even on that, I'd say it's not really conscious so much. I mean, this to say that I spend a lot of time thinking about exactly where I want to place the note relative to, and I work with a metronome, I work with different things to make sure that I'm really consciously able to go, okay, well, with this groove, with this feel, with this person, I'm going to want to place, place the notes just so, because that, the classic examples of that might be, Tony Williams and Elvin Jones, for example. If you played with those, there would be no way to think of 4 and more, with Tony playing the way he was.
Yeah.
At 18 years old, with all that incredible energy and excitement, there's no way to think that music would succeed on the level that it did groove-wise without Ron doing what Ron did.
Right.
Ron Carter being the center of and like placing the notes in a way that kept Tony from just going off into outer space. It's so I guess that's kind of one of the more extreme examples of things, because I'm trying to think of things that that everyone's kind of heard, that you can think of, like how you would approach. So I don't even want to put words on it, honestly, with Bill and Brian, for example.
You don't need to if you don't feel like it. It's fine.
It's just there's different. It's just a different, and the things that they contribute, even if you're playing over the same material at different times with each of them, it would change the way I would play, for sure. How much I would dig in, how much I would, whether I would place my notes on the front of the beat, behind the beat. And it also depends on how depends on what groove they're playing, and where they might, so. And then for me, for working on this stuff, it's just to really listen to stuff. If you're listening to, is just to really fully immerse yourself into single moments in music. I talk to people a lot about this, is like that's how I've worked on it. If you take a specific groove and just listened to it 100 times. You know, the first thing for me working on this, as I've used this a lot as an example, was when I was 12 years old and I got obsessed with, it was, you know, there was LPs then. So it was the first side of Someday My Prince Will Come. And I would just listen to that over and over and over and over again until my mom would be like leaning down into the basement where I would listen to music. I had a
Is everything okay?
I mean, she said, "Do you need a sandwich? Are you okay now?" And I mean, she was really worried about me. She had good reason to be worried. But, you know, that's what I did. To see, you know, at that moment in music where Paul Chambers put his quarter note, or whether he played in 2 or whether he played in 4, and how that felt against Jimmy Cobb's quarter note, which was, you know, also another just unbelievable example of the best ballad playing ever. You know, with and when Wynton Kelly played this, he was carrying, you know, on that record, what's it called? Old Folks.
Yeah.
That is just the, you know, and then how Miles's lines would affect, like he'd make a phrase and they'd play into double time. There was nothing that existed at all without understanding. Like you couldn't get any single element of what was going on from any instrument without understanding really how they related to each other. And to me, that's the key, is going, well, that way, the reason why Paul played that note right there is because this happened, and John Coltrane did this phrase, and seeing it all top to bottom, kind of going back to what we were talking about before, being able to see the whole picture.
Yeah.
And that was the first, like, really obsession that I got with trying to figure out why something feels so good, you know.
Yeah.
Why is it so right?
Yeah.
You know. And then there was a lot of Miles records at that time. My Funny Valentine was another one.
Oh yeah.
And you know, and
too.
just going, you know, that music could even exist was just, to me, just
nobody could compose this. Nobody.
And it can't exist again in the same way. Hopefully, you know, that kind of inspiration in a new way can exist, but not in that way. You know.
Did you talk to Herbie about this record? Sorry to go back, but
I think I did. I don't think he remembered that much about it, as I recall. But if I think I had a conversation with him because that was such an influential record, and I know it was done live, and I don't think they knew that they were being recorded when they made that record.
I think they also didn't know that they weren't being paid, and that I mean they did know, and this is why also a lot of the energy. I mean, I read it in the liner notes that Ron Carter later on wrote for this album. And I think,
no shit.
Yeah, Miles informed them that they weren't being paid because it was a benefit, you know, situation.
That could influence the band. That's rough.
There was this box set that came out in, I think, the end of the 90s or so, where they kind of put there's another take from this concert where they play Autumn Leaves. I don't know if you've heard this, but there's another.
I don't think so.
Yeah, I'll send it to you.
Oh,
so
cool.
They play Autumn Leaves, and I created a playlist in my iTunes thing of the exact order of the concert, because I only listened to My Funny Valentine on repeat, and you know, and then 4 and more. But to put the concert in the right order is really funny
Oh,
because
cool.
your mind is so used to having, My Friend Valentine as the first, and then you next,
Right.
I think All of You is next. I'm not sure, but, it's so used to having that musical moment, and then and it turns you around and you see how Miles constructed the set on the spot, and then it's really fascinating to see.
Wow. Yeah, that might be hard. Man, my head would explode, I think.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking of like, My Funny Valentine, and just the beginning of that, how it begins.
Yeah.
And Herbie's, introduction, and it's
I was always
incredible.
amazed by how Miles's trumpet sounds on the recording. There's a little bit of distortion on it also.
It's a distortion, and
and
it kind of adds to it.
It has an edge,
Yeah.
And I think the recording with Live at Carnegie Hall with Gil Evans and Hank Mobley, and you know that one, the orange one where they play with the
Right.
orchestra and Spring is Here. That's the distortion to the max, But
Right.
the My Funny Valentine, the trumpet, how it sounds, always had this, this sheer power. And
Yeah. Well, it's like it sounds kind of like it's a cheap mic, but he's like right on it. It's like
he's
really
very
close into it. So when he really lays in, but it's funny, after all these years of listening to it, it's like I can't imagine it being any other way.
Totally, yeah.
But what it must have been like to be in that room when that music was being made.
Yeah. Do you still get lost listening to that music?
Mm-hmm.
Because lost in the musical sense, because that's what happened to me. I'm still, sometimes I've analyzed this music so much, this record so much, but still, if I don't listen very, very carefully, I get lost, because they're doing so much. Sometimes I'm like, where are they in Stella by Starlight right now? I've analyzed what they did, but still the 12-year-old me, or whatever, how old I was listening to that, still puts me back in that situation where I think when you're a teenager, you take things in so thoroughly and so intensely that if you go back to that record after you're more grown up or whatever, part of me is still the teenager who listens to it and who is like, I don't understand anything that they are doing.
It's definitely. You have to focus in and go, where are they in the form and the whole thing. But when I learned, when I was 12, 13 years old, I was really fortunate to play with a lot of older musicians who were really into those, that era of Miles, and they say, well, check this out, and then next week we're going to play this song or that song, and I didn't know how to read until later, or I could read a little bit, and but the great thing about it is I started out really learning things by ear. Perfect, and understanding that relationship that we were talking about, like why somebody does this, and how, and then learning chord changes by the texture that it created, not by the necessarily knowing what a chord, if I saw a chord symbol, it was C sharp 9, or, C minor 7 plus whatever. I'd see the letter C, and then my ear would build the rest of it. Yeah. That's how I started, And then it wasn't until, later, 15, 16, 17, when I started to learn more about the vocabulary and understanding, and then going to Cal Arts, where I studied, trying to really understand harmony more. But that, to me, I felt was a really great benefit, because it also just really taught me to listen to stuff over and over and over, and then explore it and try and do it myself, or hear it, and see music as just an exploration and a way to connect with other people, rather than being something that I have to do, and it has to be, or creating some sort of anxiety or tension about how it has to be right in some way.
Yeah.
So it's been interesting since this pandemic has started, is that I've had a lot more time to revisit some of those recordings that really influenced me, and from a very young age, and it's been great in a way.
Can you mention some of them that you now revisited?
Those two. Let's see, what else? Last week it was the Goldberg Variations, and Thelonious Monk Underground was the first record I ever had, and that's on my short list to read, because I haven't listened to that in forever and ever. I have my original LP up on the wall, of that record. I think I was 12 or 11. My brother got it for me for my birthday, and I just bought it for the cover. But it's an amazing record. It's an amazing record.
It's an amazing cover too.
Yeah.
What did you think back then?
I just thought, wow, this is some really. I didn't know. I mean, but it was exciting to me.
Yeah.
And I was excited about it too, because it was something that nobody else my age was really interested in. And there was something about that, or at least people that I knew.
Was this a situation that you liked?
A few older musicians, that were older, meaning like 3 years older or something like that. And they would say, check this out. This is, and then to me, it was kind of, I grew up in Los Angeles, and at a time when everybody was listening to whatever was happening in the late 70s in popular music. And so for me, it was like kind of subversive, like I didn't, and then when I discovered Ornette's music, and just suddenly that opened up. And then the first time I heard Weather Report, like suddenly just that discovery of things that nobody else seemed to be interested in my junior high school, whatever. So those were the things that I was drawn to. Somehow. Yeah. And I don't know why. It's like the feeling, and understanding, music as a language, but hearing something for the first time, but being conscious that it's a language and that they're conveying ideas. But man, I don't know how this language works. I don't know, and then being excited by that, and then trying to figure out how it works.
Yeah.
And even now I realize, that figuring out is only getting me this far. It's like I still have, it's endless. It's like, and I can revisit that stuff and then see it from a different angle, but it's still just as big a mystery to me now.
That's beautiful.
And even music that I've participated in, I really don't know what it is. I'm serious. It's like, wow, there's a lot, so the excitement of embracing that mystery and not trying to think that I'm ever going to really understand what's going on in any given moment. I mean, it's true of life, for sure. It's true of relationships and language and situations. We see things from such a small, and I'm always trying to make that lens bigger, so I can see more of the picture, but realizing that it's still so limited.
My preparation for these interviews is listening to the music constantly. And then there's times where I have to remind myself that I was preparing for this moment for a long time already, subconsciously, by listening a lot to you. But I also read a lot of interviews, and so I've read a lot of interviews of you talking to interviewers prior to this, And in most of the interviews, it's mentioned that you studied with Charlie Haden.
Mm-hmm.
And I think all of the interviews stop at that moment and go somewhere else. And this is partly why I do this interview series, because in a lot of interviews, they stop right in the most interesting moment for me. So I really want to ask you how it was to study with him and what he has shown you and what his process was for teaching.
It's interesting to think about, when I discovered Charlie's music. At that time we were talking about, 13, 14, 15, something like that. And I think the first recording I got that Charlie was on was one of the ECM Old New Dreams records. I think the one called Old New Dreams, if that's ECM. And from that I went back in time to and discovered all the classic Ornette quartet records with Dewey or with Don Cherry and
right.
So that it's interesting that, now thinking about it after all these years, is like that was a thread that kind of pushed that led to so many aspects of my life and my growth as a musician, because I listened to Charlie and I got obsessed with that music and the early Ornette quartets with Billy Higgins and it kind of it drew me at some point then to go to Cal Arts, because I heard Charlie was there, but I didn't know anything about Cal Arts and what an amazing school it is, and how much they had to offer. Like I was at that time, I was just kind of planning on moving to New York. I was going to, finish high school and maybe play around LA a little bit, but the whole thing was that I'm just going to go to New York. And then I heard about this audition up at Cal Arts, and I just knew that Charlie was there. And so the only reason I went to the audition was to meet Charlie. And then from that, I went to the audition, and David Reitstein, who heads the program there, and Paul Novros, wonderful saxophonist, and Nick England, who was the dean of music, and they said, "Do you want to go to school here?" And I was like, "Yeah." Well, what do you, kind of like, what do you do? Like, what is that? And I found out, from that I was able to study with Charlie and Fred Tinsley, who was in the LA Philharmonic, incredible teacher as well, incredible bass player. Anyway, it opened up just like a whole bunch of stuff. And then when I moved to New York, Charlie was so helpful in connecting me with a lot of the musicians that some of whom I still play with today. But studying with Charlie was kind of very loose. And sometimes it would just be like, let's go have coffee. And we'd sit there. And I kind of took it upon myself to just ask him a lot of questions. I didn't study that much privately with him. It was mostly like working within a group, or just hanging out with him or going to gigs with him if he was playing around Los Angeles, or at school we would do stuff. Instead of, having a lesson, we would play duo in the main gallery at lunchtime, just stand there in a corner with our bass in this big space with our basses and just play, those kind of really, but when I did have time to talk to him one-on-one, I would just I would listen, kind of like what you described getting ready for this interview. It's just like listen to a lot of his stuff and then come up with things that I really wanted to, because left to his own devices, he would just tell anecdotes and jokes. That was his thing. And really corny jokes, bad jokes. And it was hilarious. But then it was like, okay, well, let's do this. And then one of the greatest things about my experience at CalArts with Charlie was that during the time I was there, so it's like mid 80s, he recorded Rejoicing. I think that was one of the trio record with Pat and Billy Higgins, Pat Metheny and Billy Higgins. Song X, which, you know, is still one of my, it's the most amazing record. And one of the Ballad of the Fallen, I think had just come out, which the Liberation Music Orchestra. So he was recording all this music, and then as he'd do it, and then there was something with Keith Jarrett. Oh shit, forget. So when he would do these recording sessions, then he'd bring all the sheet music, and we would create a class. We would just put together an ensemble, and everybody was really eager to do that in the band and just sort of play. So I remember doing a concert of all Song X. You know, we'd play the music. Maybe Charlie would play some and I'd play some, and then sometimes we'd play together or whatever. But he'd bring whatever that music was. So it was a great way to learn it, you know, because it brought you into the process of
That's beautiful.
And his thinking about how he approached it. And so it was very informal in a lot of ways. But you know, when he'd show up, he'd just come with a notebook with some music, and then somebody grab it. We'd run down to the office and make photocopies, and then we'd go, okay, well, we want to play this song and this song and this song, and he'd be going, you know, and then he would just sort of coach us on it. So it was a great way to great way to learn, actually. Yeah.
Did you talk to him about sound production?
Yeah, a lot. But it was really funny because at the same time I was studying with Charlie, I was studying with Fred Tinsley, and Fred was this, you know, he was such a great teacher. He passed away. Fred passed away about 4 years ago, but he was in the LA Philharmonic for 40 years or something, for a really long time, or 30 some years. But before that, he had lived in New York, and he was in the New York Phil for a little bit, but he was also really active in the loft scene downtown in the I don't know when this would be, like early 70s. And so he had played a lot with Dexter Gordon and a bunch of great jazz musicians. And when he played jazz, he sounded a lot like Wilbur Ware. But when I was working with him, you know, he kind of reworked my technique, and there was a lot of what I know now to be, you know, Alexander technique ideas relative to playing the bass, using the weight of your body and the way that you can move and balance, and sound production without gripping, but just using the weight of your body to play the instrument.
Relaxation.
Because to that point, I had some guidance. I had a great teacher named Monty Budwig, who was active around Los Angeles when I was younger, and he had helped me some. But a lot of what Fred was doing was kind of reworking my technique and really getting, you know, working with the bow and getting a center on the sound. And so working with Fred, and this is a long way around to your question about Charlie. But Charlie was way into these gut strings that had like a nylon wrapped gut. They were really thick, and they bowed like they sounded like shit when you bow them. This is like they were rough to bow. and he was always trying to, and they were super expensive, but he would get free sets of them. And he was always trying to give me, come on, man, you got to do this. You got to like, and I was working with Fred, and there was no way I could have one instrument that I could, you know, practice, you know, 2 or 3 hours a day with the bow or whatever. And then, you know, and work on these things that Fred was working on and do these things. So I had to like kind of, so it was kind of a running joke. Charlie was always trying to give me these golden spiral strings, and I was like, and I would put them on, and then when I put them on, I felt like all I did was sound, you know, like some guy trying to play like Charlie Haden, because like that suddenly would just, you play that, and you hear it and you feel it on your finger and the way those strings were, and it's still to this day, if I play on an instrument like that, it just takes me right to that spot. But yeah. For me, you know, finding my own sound was very, very much influenced by both of them in that way. And I still, you know, and, you know, definitely physically thinking of things, trying to think of, you know, things in the way that was taught from Fred. But sonically, I hear so much of Charlie. So it's kind of whatever it is now for me.
Yeah.
But.
Wow. Now I want to see a video of these classes where he would teach you the music of song X and stuff like that. Wow. Another one of my favorite bands is the one with you know, Chris Potter's quartet with Kevin Hayes and you and Bill Stewart. And but maybe before we go there, another one of my favorite records of his is Gratitude, and I just want to know a little bit how it came to that configuration of the quartet with Brian, and also yeah, maybe that comes back to how we talked about working differences with Brian and Bill, but anything that you would like to share from that recording, Gratitude, and the tour, because I also have a lot of bootlegs from the tour, and it's so great to see how you guys work this music. Especially yesterday, I went for a run, listening to a recording from Cheltenham of that band, and I think that was a tour that came after the recording was done, and you played everything slower than on the recording, which I thought was unusual, because you know, especially when we talk about Miles, you would record something and then it would just get faster and faster. Like
right.
The other day, I listened to the first recording of Walkin', you know, of Miles, and it's super slow, and then you go to 4 and more, and or even after that. So that was a nice moment, how you guys settled into those super slow tempos. I'm not sure what I'm actually asking, but I just love that band so much and that record. Maybe you can share some memories from that.
I'm really curious to hear some of these things that actually, I listened to that record in April or May this year, and I was really like, it took me back, like remembering a lot of that music, because I had not listened to it since we made it, which is kind of typical of a lot of things that I do. Is like I kind of, you know, want to make them and move, you know, then move on to the whatever, you know. Or if the band is actively in it, I don't really want to, you know, revisit, you know, if we're touring with it, I'm not going to necessarily revisit what we just did. And just, you know, because you're already, you know, you do it once, and then to me, you know, already looking at new ways to approach the same music. So sometimes it can be actually a hindrance to spend too much time ruminating on one thing. But unfortunately, my memory for that kind of stuff is not that great. Like I don't, like tours go, and I just remember and listening to music. It's some beautiful writing. I mean, that I thought, and you know, the way that Chris put that together, and how he would, you know, really get the essence of each person that he was writing for and thinking about in a way that was really unique to Chris, but also it was just really beautifully done. So I don't know if there's much more I can add to that. The quartet recordings I have, we toured a lot, especially with Bill, with that quartet, and the recordings that we made at that time. So I think there's one live from the Vanguard.
Oh yeah, man, I love that one.
And
but also the Gratitude story. I want to stay a little bit with Gratitude, because right in, I think in the middle of the tour, or maybe it was different tours, Brian is playing most of the first half or something, and then Clarence Penn steps in, and I love how he changes the atmosphere of the band. It has another sort of an edge to it, and it also changes how you guys play. It has its different atmosphere and a different vibe. As you know, whenever there's a different drummer, he will change the sound of a band. But I thought it was very interesting what he did with the music. Do you remember some of that?
Yeah, but you know, I'd say that there's a lot of bands that exist where you change one individual and the band is still kind of not changing. And I've been in situations where I might be the one stepping into that role, and then you feel that it's not that the rest of the band isn't adapting so much. But I just like to say, you know, like with relative to you know, Chris and Kevin and myself, it's like, you know, everybody's really consciously deciding to kind of shed the preconceptions of how the other drummer approached it, and try and really, you know, and Kevin and Chris are, you know, I know very well that they would, you know, really listen for the things that that Clarence could bring to the music, that would be different than Brian. And so I could see it changing, you know. Specific stories I don't remember too much. But.
Did Bill ever play this music? Because sometimes in my mind I play mind games like you did with you know, 4 and More, imagining maybe Elvin playing that music or whatever. Or with Gratitude, I was always wondering, because I know the other quartets sound so well also, you know, from all the other recordings, how would it have sounded like with Bill on drums, you know?
I guess we probably did, but I'd have to ask Chris or Bill.
Okay.
I remember. But I mean, because we toured a lot, especially with Bill, you know, during, you know, before Gratitude and after. So
can you maybe talk a little bit about the process of that quartet, the working process, whenever there was time to figure out a new composition of Chris's, or did you talk about the music a lot in that group, or how did you guys work?
My recollection is we didn't rehearse much, but we played together quite a bit. So, and before and during that period, I had other projects with Chris. I had other projects with Kevin, other projects with Brian, other projects with Bill, combinations. So we, you know, because we all kind of moved, all those musicians moved to New York around the same time, as I recall, around 1990, give or take a year or two. So I met all those guys in the first months of living in New York. And so it became kind of for me, like just a real, central, a real community of musicians that, and in the beginning, none of us really had any work. We just play together a lot, and then little by little, we started to hook up different things and tours and recording and whatnot. But, but specifically for the tours with Chris's quartet, we didn't rehearse that much. And then Chris would a lot of times he's, insanely prolific composer. So he would often be like sound checks. Here's something else. Here's what I'm thinking with this. And so a lot of it, as I recall, would grow on the tour as we go along, adding a song or two songs each evening, and then he'd write or rewrite stuff on the road. He's insane in that way. I mean, he'll say what I took a week off, and then what he really did was write, 12 new songs.
Yeah. It's incredible.
So that's kind of but we didn't rehearse a lot in advance of the tours, as I recall. One or two get-togethers, that would be it.
Mm-hmm. In I think 2002 it was. I have a recording of you stepping in with the Wayne Shorter Quartet at North Sea Jazz Festival with an orchestra also.
Mm-hmm.
Man, I love how you play with this group, and it takes me back to the first thing I said to you, which is keeping your ego in check. When I first heard it, I was feeling for you. I don't know, because I think it's only 3 tracks or something. Maybe it was more in the concert, or I don't know if you played more concerts with them. But to me, I only had those 3 tracks, so I was listening to it. And it starts out with Wayne and Danilo doing a very extended duet. Beautiful piece, and they go places. And for me, it's very personal because Danilo references Federico Mompo's one of his pieces. And he's my guy. Federico Mompo is one of my favorite composers. And Wayne plays over that composition. I don't know if Wayne realizes that he's playing over Mompo's music at that moment, but this is such a beautiful moment for me. But still, I'm in that moment and I'm thinking, wow, what does Scott think about right now? I'm sure he's enjoying the music, but still, you're stepping in such a close working group, and you have a lot of responsibility as the bassist, as does everybody else, of course, but still, and there's an orchestra, and then there's the first moment where the other members come in and you jump right into it, but it doesn't feel forced at all. It feels like, you're just enjoying to play, and obviously, I'm sure you feel comfortable with Brian and Danilo, but I don't know how the process was for you to on the one hand prepare for this concert, and also maybe you can share some remembrances of that.
Yeah, actually, I'm curious to hear. I've never heard it, but
okay.
But I do remember that I was on tour with Chris. With the quartet. I think we were in Perugia or something, and I got a call, and I was doing, or maybe the quartet was then going to go to North Sea, and they asked can you come early and take an early flight and play this concert with Wayne? And I said, yeah, if I can make it. And I remember that I arrived, my flight arrived in Amsterdam, and then I went to the concert hall, and there was going to be a rehearsal, sound check, and then the concert. That was going to be it. And I arrived late, and the whole orchestra was there, and I had to pull my bass out of the flight case and just kind of go up and go into the music. The good, definitely, having, and I do remember the feeling of like we set up very tight, as I recall, and that Wayne was very close to me, I think. I mean, you've seen the video, so I don't know.
It's no video,
but
it's
I remember,
just audio.
Oh, okay. The feeling of like the quartet was like really tight in as a unit with Wayne just right there, and I had played a fair amount with Danilo, but a lot with Brian, so I had, and there, and I forget the circumstances, but it was like John couldn't make the concert, and I just stepped in, and I came in late, and so I didn't have a lot of information about what to go on, and my memory of the music was that it'd have these written passages for orchestra with some bass lines and things, and then it would just say open, or it would say and then that was the quartet spot. Then we just like, so trying to thread these things together without knowing where the destination is really tricky. But if you have, Wayne and Danilo and Brian as your guides, you just really, again, just like surrendering to that and trying to find, and then looking for those moments where it might be important for you to instigate something, or for you to bring some power or intention to the music. But then knowing when those other moments when it's like, when to wait to see where things might go. And those are the big decisions, whether you're going to put yourself right in the center of this, or you're going to wait on the periphery, and then you're going to move in some other, open this door and go in through this way, or stay over here. And I do remember asking Wayne, there was something, and the part had written on it, said, it had bars, and it was a specific number of bars that was supposed to happen, where we were supposed to groove. Maybe there was a tonal center or something, and we were supposed to play, and it said 16 crossed out. It said 12 crossed out, 32 crossed out. And then it didn't have anything. And I remember saying, and the conductor was talking to the rest of the orchestra about something about bowings or something like that. And I Wayne was right there, and I had my music was right, like where he could see my music. We were like very close, and I said, Wayne, whatever it was, like letter B, how many bars is letter B? And he goes, he told me this story. He's like, suddenly we went on this journey. He's like, it's kind of like when you start on a journey and you're going on a path and you don't know the exact direction of the path, and it goes this way, and it was some kind of story, and I don't remember what it was. But the funny thing is that this little section was a specific number of bars. And then I hear Brian go, just after the whole thing's over, he just laughed, and I laughed, and then Brian leans over and he goes, 12 bars. Yeah. And I was like, beautiful. All right. Good. And the story he told me was beautiful. It was about, just, finding your way in the, I don't know, this whole thing was great.
Wow.
But, that kind of situation is just, it's how much can you trust the people you're with, and to it's, and then if I'm really, if my ears are really open and my mind is really open, and when I see that there's something in the music that's a role that I can play, that seems obvious to me, I'll play that role. for that time. Like maybe there's a bass line I'm playing and the strings are playing over the top of it. I don't know, whatever. Then I can do, I know that. But then in other moments, you have to shed that and go, really, what's going on now? Especially in open sections and when your spontaneous composition is happening, is really taking the cues of where the energy might be going. And with musicians like that, they'll help guide you. But as soon as you get too focused in on what you're doing, and maybe you're thinking about your intonation or your volume or your articulation or something specifically, that takes your energy inward. And you have to be really careful that that's something you do when you're practicing. That's something you do when you're at home. You put in that kind of analytical mind. When you're in a situation like that that's so open, you need to really shed that. You need to really spread your attention again widely so that you're able to take whatever clues might come from something. And it could be very subtle things that Brian might play or voicing or a rhythm that's happening or something. And so it's an exercise in keeping your mind open and your ears open to what's happening around you. The worst thing you can do is then and it happens to all of us, nervous energy, your attention, your first thing that happens, when you become self-conscious and nervous is your breathing becomes shallow.
Yeah.
Your ability to really empathize or see what's going on outside of yourself, it shrinks. It goes away completely.
Also felt the listening part is, being able to identify notes maybe or shapes or whatever. It becomes very, very. If it's good when you're relaxed, that's good. But if once you start self-doubting and thinking about yourself too much, that gets limited. It becomes more limited.
Everything shrinks basically, and it's just as much a physical response as a mental response, or your ability to assess the situation and decide how to respond. So it's less of a response and more of a reaction. And then you get tight, and then somebody, it happens a lot when, in challenging music, we get lost all the time from each other. The more we stretch, and with musicians that I've played with forever, it seems, that we're always trying to keep moving and keep trying new things, and you're getting out of your comfort zone, and something happens, and suddenly we don't know where one is anymore. And what do you do in that moment? You have to really then take a breath and listen harder than anything. And sometimes
no moment where you listen more closely than when you're lost.
And there's two ways to deal with it, and both of them are correct in different moments, which would be like, let me find out where his one is, and I obviously, it depends on the circumstance, or it's like, here, let me give a clue. But with musicians that I know really well, especially drummers that we've talked about, Brian or Bill, or is that I can hear really subtle clues that come. They don't have to give me like this huge one, or they can give me just like, I can just tell many times where something is. And and no performance situation is perfect. Like, there's issues with sound in different venues, and you can't hear very well, or or the acoustics are bad, or the instruments, you're struggling with this or that. There's always things. There's no perfect situation, and that's another way that people often get to the point where they can't, I should speak for myself, where if I'm thinking about, you know, what I wish something was, what the situation, what reality, I wish for a different reality is what I'm doing. And that's always a bad place to go.
Yeah.
Because you can't do anything with that. You can't
work with that.
Fix anything. You can't, you can't. So, you know, that it's just really, you know, and I find that for me, if I feel that in any particular situation, it always starts with the breath. To bring, you know, or even like a really physically difficult thing that I'm doing on the bass. Bass is a really strange instrument, and sometimes there's like a lot of, as you noticed, I'm sure, but there's a lot of physical things that can happen and or that can challenge you, and so it's really important just to be able to maintain, you know, equanimity in those kind of situations, so that, because as soon as you're going to lose the battle of, like, say you're just trying to play a really fast tempo or something like that, kind of related to that, what we're talking about is that it's really important to maintain that breath and equanimity, so that, because the second you start playing through adrenaline, then everything begins to tighten up. It might help you to get over a situation for a minute, but it's not gonna work in the long run. Yeah. And basically, what it is you know, you're getting less oxygen to the muscles tighten up, and the thing, you know, then you can get through something for a second, but it won't. You know.
How did you learn this?
From Fred. Well, from a lot of people, but Fred Tinsley was big on that. Like, you know, that all, you know, the sound really is going to come from your whole body, and knowing that. I mean, to watch him play was such a joy, because he just like take the bow. He played German bow, he's a big guy, and you know, really open chest, big breath, and then when he just draw the bow across the strings, you just see no effort. His hand would be like the bow is going to fall out of his hand, and this huge sound comes out, and you just go, how the fuck did he do? You know, it's like this big sound with just, it looked like there was nothing happening, and that's, you know, that was kind of so watching him was more, and what he said, you know, what he told me, but we worked a lot on long tones and playing very slowly for a long time. And that to me is and still now, even, you know, if I only have a half hour to practice, it's going to be things like that are very slow. Not always the same things, not even the same, they're not particularly scales or things that I go through but it's like finding the sound, and whether it's pizzicato or arco, it's finding the center of the pitch and reacquainting yourself with how your body feels in that moment. And recognizing things about where your mind is, where your body is, in terms of, you know, are you agitated? Are you relaxed? Are you tired? Are you hungry? You know, you start to see those things and be able to go, okay, that's what's happening now. Good. Okay, fine. Move on. You know, find the center of the sound. And so that was a lot of Fred stuff that I learned. It was amazing working with him.
Wow. Now I want to hear him play. Is there something that you could recommend for people to check out him?
I don't know. Honestly, there's no, I don't have any recordings, commercially available recordings, except for stuff with the Philharmonic. But I do remember when I first is a great example of how Fred, he was teaching, when he was teaching CalArts, he was also teaching at UCLA in Los Angeles. And I went to see him play his recital with, and I don't remember what piece they were playing. And I had just started playing with Fred, and he was playing his recital, his faculty recital at Royce Hall, which is a very large theater, beautiful theater. And so it was bass and piano, and for some reason, I guess the page turner didn't show up. So they asked me to turn pages for the first piece of the night, and to turn pages for the pianist. And I remember him I wish I would remember what piece it was, but he started out and it was just solo bass. And like I said, it's just like so effortless, and it just filled the room. And I'm just like, wow. So I'm sitting on stage next to this pianist, this woman who I didn't know. And then she starts playing, and I'm just totally swept up by the music. I remember this. And then suddenly my heart just went like up into my throat. It was like, I'm supposed to be doing something. Right? Like suddenly I look up and I don't know where she is, like where we are in the music.
Yeah.
And I start looking at the phrases, and I'm seeing the phrases, and I think I know where it is. I reach up and I grab and I go like this, and she goes, like I totally like I screwed up. My only thing that I was supposed to do was turn the page, you know. I don't know. Wow. I don't know how that relates to anything, but I just thought of that.
You got lost in the music.
I was speaking of like moments when you totally lose. Like I was so wrapped up in the music that I forgot that there was only one reason I was on stage.
Yeah.
And yeah. So I failed on that one, but
that's beautiful. I'm always interested in what someone learns from his peers, and maybe we could go into detail what you learned from your bass colleagues who came up with you. Did you hang out with a lot of them, and did you exchange ideas, or were there people that maybe were a little bit older than you when you came to New York that helped you a great deal? Or maybe you can share something in that regard.
Yeah. Recently I've been corresponding a lot with Steve Swallow, who I did watch some of Steve's thing that you did, and I'm yet to watch the whole thing, but he's one of my heroes of life, not just on the instrument, but just as a human. But forget it. I mean, it's, a composer, and he's somebody like I can remember him. I think it was when I did Magic Line. And he actually sent me a letter, like, the ones that used to come in the post.
Yeah.
Remember those?
Yeah.
And now we've been corresponding by email a lot, but just to connect with something and from Steve, just he's just always been so. Inspiring and kind of rooting for me and helping me, and just really thoughtful ideas about recordings that I did and stuff, and songwriting and so I don't know if that answers your question, but I mean, that's been really great in the last, since this pandemic started. We've been kind of emailing back and forth, and I love to talk to him about anything,
Yeah.
And
me too.
And Carla, Carla's so amazing, and yeah. So.
Maybe to go back to it, I mean, people that came up with you are maybe somebody like Larry Grenadier or something like that. That generation. did you correspond with them as well? I mean, back in the day, hung out with them, exchange ideas about the bass and how to learn more.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, with friends, Larry and John Patitucci and other friends. Like the only times we kind of have the time and cross paths. So since none of us are touring now, maybe it should be easy because they don't live so far from me. But usually just, crossing paths backstage and checking out and just seeing how, again, like how different people produce different results on the instrument.
Yeah.
And how they, I've talked to Larry a lot about, how he deals with different, amplifying the bass in different situations and getting the sound that he does. It's such an amazing sound. And the same with John. And actually, there's a recording that a two bass recording that I did with John that a friend of ours, Benjamin Koppel, put together. That's never been released. And I'm hoping we can actually mix that at some point. That was, I don't know, we recorded that maybe 3 or 4 years ago.
Duet?
No, it's John and I and Benjamin Koppel and Satoshi Takeishi, who's an incredible percussionist. Kind of has a unique, it's not even really a drum set. He generally sits on the floor and has, but amazing feel in just an incredible musician. I don't want to call him a drummer, but because what he does is so beyond that. It was, but just being in the same room with somebody like John and making sound and talking about stuff, and it's great. I learned so much.
Yeah. I might be going out on a limb here, but in the past days, as I said, I've been listening so much to you, and there were moments where I felt like I want to ask you about Anders Jormin, if you like Anders Jormin's playing.
I don't really know his playing.
Okay. Okay.
But
maybe
now,
that...
see, I hope you're making like a really great list for me. Right? When this is over, I expect an email with like all the things that I got to listen to.
Okay, I think I can remember most of it.
Okay. I'll send you a reminder email.
I mean, we haven't talked about Jim Hall yet. Right before I called you, I was listening to The Magic Meeting. And what an amazing recording that is, and how great you sound with Lewis Nash together. It's just, incredible. And that recording, I think it's live, right? At the Village Vanguard or something.
Yeah.
And while listening to that, I was reading the liner notes to the duet recording, Jim Hall with basses, and he talks about your first meeting or something, and he talks about you being able to follow anywhere, and you talked about this thing already a lot with Wayne and with the thing about seeing the big picture, and I think it's very connected to what he's talking about, being open to follow, as And then the other day I was listening to another bootleg, maybe that needs to be on the list, of you guys playing Jim Hall's music with Terry Clark and Chris Potter and a string quartet. And the string quartet was very much involved with you guys. It wasn't like the typical, here's some chords and here maybe a melody or something. It was like intertwining when you guys were improvising, and it was really, it seemed like, I felt like, I think I was doing the dishes or something. I felt like, wow, these guys they must have rehearsed this stuff a lot. Because it felt like with the string quartet, it doesn't really happen like that. there has to be some effort behind it a little bit, you know. I was wondering how it was to work with Jim on new music, on different projects, and what you've learned from him.
Man, that's a big subject because Jim, I started playing with Jim not that long after I moved to New York, so maybe 1991, and I worked with him off and on in different things until the last concert that we did at Lincoln Center right before he passed. And so it's like 25 years or something. And he, you know, he was one of the most generous people on the planet that I ever met. And that was true of his approach to music too, you know, and really selfless when it came to music. It's like, I'm pretty sure that if Jim could just play behind a screen, you know, but make live music with his friends and nobody could actually see him do it, I think that's what he would have preferred, you know. Like, in a way, like, be involved in it, be able to interact and to be with people, but the spotlight not on him, you know. That was Jim. And you reminded me in one of the favorite things I loved to do with Jim was playing free, you know, with no preconceptions, and he would always apologize. And you mentioned Jim Hall with basses, so we did these things. I think they're called Abstract 1, Abstract 2, or something like that. And there's one on there with George Mraz and me and Jim. And and just those moments with Jim were absolutely the best. And then you'd finish it, because everything that he played was a composition always. And so when he thought, you know, when there was a moment with no preconceived or no written down music, no preconceived form, it was still that thread of melody that was always melody and texture, and it was just amazing what he would come up with. It's like, yeah. And then always at the end of it, he'd just turn and he'd go, "Man, sorry, man." And he'd be like, what are you apologizing for? He also had this really funny thing when we were on the road, especially if we were touring, you know, duo. We did a lot of duo touring, and which was some of the greatest moments of my musical life, just because I just play acoustic standing next to Jim, and it was such an organically great feeling, you know, just to do, you know, to play with Jim, and also just to really embrace that space that he, you know, always, which I've said this many times, but if you played something just because you were nervous and you felt something needed to go in this space, it felt like the stupidest thing you ever, if you were next to Jim, it would be like, oh. If you just played something because there was too much space, it would be I don't know how to describe it. It would just feel like, God, why did I do that? So you'd really have to just step back, and then his level of dynamics, you know, would go from a really zero dynamics, the amp off completely, you know, to, you know, but a huge range of dynamics. But the real loud part was not, by most bands' standpoint, would be their bottom end. But the important thing that he taught me was that, you know, it's not a matter of, you know, how loud you play, or it's the dynamic range of the music that you're playing, of the performance or the piece.
Mm.
So with him, it would be like I'd be playing acoustic and feel like I can't play any softer than this on the bass, just like, and feel like, oh, you know, and what it does is it really, it had this amazing effect when you're playing for an audience. They would just draw people in, you know? People would just lean in when we do concerts. And I remember doing some concerts with Bill Frisell and Joey Barron and Jim at Orvieto, and doing a few of the concerts that we did. I think two of them were completely acoustic in halls that had like, you know, 500 seat. And I remember the sound engineers getting very nervous and saying, you can't do this, blah, blah, blah. And they say, well, we're going to do it. You know? So Jim would be playing at this volume, and Bill would be trying to get softer than Jim, and I'd be playing acoustic, and Joey, because Joey's so brilliant, to create any kind of energy he wanted at any volume, he had the control to do it. So he could create this incredible, so it was really dramatic, you know, because it would just draw people. At first you'd hear people shuffling and moving in the audience, and eventually they just really settled because they really wanted to hear what was happening, and the music would just expand out from there. And so, but yeah, I don't know where I was going with that, but you know, playing with Jim was as good as it gets, for sure.
Wow. You also made a record, right, with that combination?
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the one Magic Meeting, that was a live one. That was the only one that I co-produced with a friend of ours, Brian Camilio.
Yeah.
And Brian has Artist Share.
Right. Yeah.
Company, and he put out the one that you were talking about. So there's duo with Jim and Bill, I think, is on one disc, and then one disc is me and Joey with Jim and Bill. And
it's incredible, right?
I loved hearing the two of them play together, because you can, it's like you're just confronted with that thing of like Bill's totally unique Bill way of playing, Bill Frisell.
Yeah.
But how it comes directly from Jim.
Yeah, you know, absolutely. So connected.
But then he does his own, you know, he's just completely unique. But the thread of that, and I remember the first times that we did, I think we did a live at a week at the Vanguard or something with Bill. And Bill, out of deference to Jim, just plugged directly from his guitar into his amp, like totally basic sound. And then Jim, I think, trying to maybe, you know, as a homage to Bill or something, brought every electronic box that he had. And the funny thing was with Jim is he didn't really know how to use the stuff that he had.
But it sounds so great. It's so personal what he gets out of those effects. I mean, also on the Magic Meeting, nobody sounds like that. Nobody tries things that he's doing with those pedals.
Yeah. Well, the thing, he just saw it as another kind of compositional device in a way.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like an effect.
He would just go like, I'm going to change the texture, but then he'd lean over and you'd have like a harmonizer. But he couldn't always see what interval it was going to come out with. So he'd look at me kind of like he didn't know it was going to be a fifth or a minor second, and he'd lean over and he'd push the button and he'd look at me, and then he'd play the note, and let's say it's a minor second, and then he just bases the rest of his solo on that. So it was like it was a way of kind of forcing him into a new thing. And the thing that he did quite often, and I know he did it with students as well, is like detune the guitar just randomly and then create something. and he was very much into that. And a lot of people who know Jim might only know him from playing certain standards and whatnot.
Yeah.
But his, he was the real bridge between, jazz guitar the way it was and modern guitar. I mean, you can hear the influence on so many different guitarists. You mentioned, Wolfgang or Bill, Pat Metheny, Sco, totally. I mean, they all,
But he loves them back. That's what I
pieces.
love. He loves them back, and he admires them back.
Mm-hmm.
When I saw or heard this record with Frizzell and him, I could feel his love for Frizzell, his admiration for and vice versa, obviously, but still,
Yeah, incredibly open and really curious too. Just like always asking questions. How'd you get that sound? Like he'd hear something on the bass or something, and I know he did this with all those guitarists as well. When he'd play with them, he's like, "How'd you do that? Wait, what? How did you get that?" It was like up into his 80s, and he's like, "How do you do this? And how can we make something new?" And he hated to talk about the past. He liked to talk about people. If you said, question and answer things that we did and maybe, clinics and whatnot were hilarious because somebody would come out with like in 1962 with you and Jimmy Jufrey and blah, blah, and what kind of strings did you use? Or talking about guitars or something. He just his eyes would just glaze over and he'd just be like, but if somebody asked you about Jimmy Jufrey, he'd light up, start telling stories about the human connected with the music. Then that's what interested him. Everything else was just sort of like, just some academic shit that he didn't want to deal with. So and it was really funny on tours, he would always try and rope me into interviews where it was obvious that the interviewer only wanted to interview Jim. And then he would be, "Scott, you have to do this interview." And I'm like, Jim, they don't want to talk to me. It's like, no. So he would like pull up a chair and then he would do stuff like, I remember him going, they would say, "Mr. Hall, on this new record that you have out, blah, blah, blah." And then he would say, "Yeah, it was fun." And then he'd go, "Scott, you have a new record out." And so he would turn and start asking me, like he would just start asking me questions about how I wrote whatever and blah, blah, blah. It was hilarious. And then, because he didn't want to talk about himself and he didn't want to talk about the past.
Yeah.
In the way that a lot of people do, as like that happened. And, he was more interested in relationships and musical and personal relationships, and they were totally connected. There was no separation. His love for Sonny. So if you or Bill or Joey Barron, or he loved funny stories and moments in music and but as a living thing.
Yeah.
As people, when you're and how it is in this moment, rather than just kind of sitting around talking about the past. But he loved to share. I mean, he was super generous with younger musicians, obviously. If somebody was coming from a truly curious and excited about music, that's the first time I met Julian Lage was playing with Jim and Kenny Wollesen, and I think Julian was like 11 or some shit, and and Jim, just Julian told me these stories later on, about how Jim would just like, "Hey, you're interested in the guitar," Julian's like all starstruck. It was like, and just share things with people. So that's who he was, And that's why he affected so many people. But what an innovator! I mean, the textures that he got on the guitars, nobody else could do.
Yeah.
We're all trying, but
let's
trying to digest it.
Let's close with maybe you can tell us what. That wasn't the royal us, maybe. Maybe you can tell me what your favorite recording of Jim is, or do you have a favorite, or what do you think of the first?
The recording that the recording he did with Charlie Haden. Although I haven't listened to it in a long time, is beautiful. The obvious ones would be like the bridge. It was, first the first thing that I heard or was conscious of when I was growing up, and anything that he did with Jimmy Giuffre. Yeah. Whatever the first ones, those in 1958, 1959. Parenthetically, as Jim, that was always a term that he would use. Parenthetically, I was just listening to the Jimmy Giuffre 3 with Paul Bley. This is off subject. Paul Bley and Steve Swallow. There's a live concert from Stuttgart that's like unbelievably great.
I don't know that one.
I just had it up. I was listening to it. I don't have it. Yeah, it's I think 1961. And I'm trying to think of the name of it, and it's a live thing. It's amazing. But I like Magic Meeting, even though I played on it. And I don't think Jim liked the mix at all. But I love, I mean, so many things come to mind, but and for sure, all the duo stuff that he did with Bill. I think I love to hear them, because I can just close my eyes, imagine them both, and remember them, and that their music is so, equally authentic and honest, and honest and great and flawed, and just go like, this is what it is. This is what this moment is. And I'm always drawn to music that feels that way. It's not all polished.
Thank you.
So I guess I don't have one favorite, Jim, but
that's the answer. Yeah. But you mentioned a lot of great ones, so thank you. And thanks for doing this with me. It was really a pleasure to talk to you, and very inspiring.
Man, Pablo, thank you so much for having me, and I look forward to sometime we might make some music together.
Oh man, that would be a dream come true for me.